We're going to read from Miss Ida's Porch by Sandra Belton. There's a very best time of day on Church Street, my street. It begins when the sky and my feelings match, both kind of rosy around the edges. You can hear all the best time noises. Shoe Kate and Mr. Fisher laughing from their kitchen, Reginald and T-Bone slamming out the back door, Mr. Porter coming home from work in his noisy old car calling out to everybody he passes on the street, Netta practicing on a piano, mostly to get out of washing dinner dishes, and Mr. Willie making his just checking on call to Mrs. Jackson, his 90-year-old mama. The noises feel good. Here's a picture of Church Street. Most of the big kids are getting ready to hang out somewhere, like at the drugstore down on the corner or on the steps in front of the church. Those are some of their favorite pretending places. The boys pretending not to see the girls, and the girls pretending to ignore the boys. Like my sister Sylvia pretended to ignore Pee-wee. Most of the little kids are getting ready to get ready for bed. Getting ready for bed takes a long time for the little kids. Some of them can make it last all the way to the end of the best time, especially the Tolver kids. Just 5 more minutes, Mama, please, they say. Then, after 5 minutes, they hide somewhere in the backyard for 5 more minutes. Then they start pleading all over again for 5 more minutes. But most of the kids on Church Street are in-between kids, like Frida and me. Some of the best times we just sit on her porch or mine, playing jacks or reading comics. Sometimes we play statues with Rosetta and Pumpkin and Rodney. Sometimes T-Bone plays too. Most of the best times, though, just about all of us end up at Miss Ida's, sitting on her porch. Miss Ida's house is halfway down Church Street. That's probably one reason folks end up there a lot. Another reason is Miss Ida herself. She and the best time are kind of alike, soft and peaceful. But the biggest reason we all end up there is that Miss Ida's porch is a telling place. Usually Mr. Fisher comes over to sit on the porch about the same time we do. It's about the time the sky is getting rosy all over. You know then that the best time is settling in. Miss Ida calls Mr. Fisher Poisson because they both come from Louisiana, and that's what people there used to call him. Mr. Fisher has been all over. It's hard to tell how old he is, but from all the stuff he's done, he could be really old. He doesn't look old though, especially when he walks. He sort of bounces. Miss Ida always says, Poisson has a jaunty step. Mr. Fisher has lots of memories about the places he's been and things he's seen. Almost anything can make him think about something he saw or heard or did a while back. He'll start out, puts my mind on the time, and we know what's coming. Tell us about that time, Poisson, Miss Ida will say to Mr. Fisher when he begins his remembering. And he will. Like the time Frida and Pumpkin were arguing about what Miss Jackson said when she was over at Pumpkin's house, visiting Miss Esther, Pumpkin's aunt. Lena Horne ain't never visited Miss Jackson, Pumpkin, Frida said. Miss Jackson was just talking out of her head, girl. You know she's 90 years old. You crazy for believing her. You don't know nothing, Frida. Pumpkin was getting angry. Just because Miss Jackson 90 don't mean she's talking out of her head. Most of the time, Miss Jackson make more sense than you. Pumpkin and T-Bone almost fell over laughing. Me too. And this made Frida fighting mad. Hold on there, Miss Lady, said Mr. Fisher, taking hold of one of Frida's hands. Don't press ugly on that pretty face. Tell me now, how come you think Lena Horne couldn't have stayed in Miss Jackson's house? Because Lena Horne's famous. Why would she want to stay at Miss Jackson's? Why not? Said Mr. Fisher, and he settled back in his chair. I had a feeling that some remembering was getting started. Used to be that most all the famous black folks who came to town stayed at somebody's house. How come, Mr. Fisher? Frida sat on the stoop in front of Mr. Fisher. Nowhere else for 'em to stay. Couldn't stay in hotels. Hotels didn't allow no black guests, famous or not. When our folk came to town to give a speech, put on a show, whatever they came to do, we had to be the ones to give them a bed. Puts my mind on a time. Back in 39. I was working in West Virginia then, working in the mines. Lived in a nice town close to where I worked. Lots of good folks there working hard to make a life for themselves and their children. Mr. Fisher's remembering was making him smile. Anyhow, a big dance took place in the town every year. Folks came from all around to go to this dance. That year, 1939, the dance was really going to be special. Duke Ellington was coming to town. The great bandsman himself was coming to play for the dance. Was Duke Ellington famous? I bet none of us knew who Duke Ellington was. Bunkin was brave enough to ask. Mr. Fisher almost jumped out of his chair. Don't they teach you children nothing in school? Duke Ellington famous? Mr. Fisher was almost shouting. Don't get bothered now, Poisson. Miss Ida put her hand on Mr. Fisher's arm. She was speaking in that peaceful way she has. Can't expect nobody to listen if you shouting now, can you? Just tell the children about Duke Ellington. Tell them about the sound of that band. Sound that made your feet get a life of their own on the dance floor. Tell them how he not only led the band from his piano, but also wrote most of the songs they played. You could hum your little baby to sleep with some of those pretty songs, and how some of those songs were played by the big orchestras and sung by huge choirs in halls all over the world. Mr. Fisher had a big smile on his face. I ain't got to tell him, Miss Ida, you're doing a fine job, mighty fine job. The sky was starting to look like the Nevertell blue blanket on Big Mama's bed. Nevertell blue is light enough to still be blue, but dark enough to hide the dirt, Big Mama says. The best time noises were still there, but they had changed. You could hear the chirping bugs. One of the Tolver kids was crying, probably asking for something he shouldn't have. Mr. Willie was playing his radio. Jazz. Mr. Fisher was still remembering. Yes, sir. The great Duke Ellington was coming to play for us, for our dance, and there was not one hotel in the state that would put him up and take his money for doing it. If he had a mind to rest himself in a bed, he was going to have to be in the home of some black person. Did he stay with you, Mr. Fisher? Punkin asked. Well, not with me exactly, but in the house where I was living, Miss Lomax's house. Miss Lomax had a big, fine house, and she kept it real nice. I rented a room on the 3rd floor. Mr. Fisher started to grin, like he always did when he got to a part he liked to tell. I was there when the great man arrived with 3 of his bandsmen. So you got to meet Duke Ellington? T-Bone was impressed. We all were. I not only met him, I was there when he sat at the piano in Miss Lomax's parlor. Duke's playing heated up that little room. I'm telling you it did. He was some kind of good. Mr. Fisher grew quiet, remembering quiet. He stopped smiling too. Imagine that. A man like that. Talented, famous, everything. Not being able to pay his own money to sleep in a crummy little hotel room just because he's black. After that, we were all quiet. I was wishing I knew more about what Mr. Fisher was remembering. I bet Frida was wishing so too. Here's a picture. Everybody listening and talking. There's Miss Ida and there's the kids. There's Mr. Fisher telling the story. He's remembering. See that? That's Duke Ellington over there. He's remembering that. Bubbles showed up for this part. He knows the story's getting good. Evening, everybody. Must be some powerful thinking over here tonight because everybody's deep into it. Shoe Kate was climbing the steps to the porch. I hadn't even heard her coming up the walk. Nobody else must either. Hey, Shoe Kate, come on over here by me. Miss Ida patted the place on the swing beside her. Shoe Kate is Mr. Fisher's wife. Her name is really Mrs. Kate Fisher, but just about everybody calls her Shoe Kate. She told us one time that when she was little, she used to tease her baby brother, telling him that their mama said he had to call her Sugar Kate because she was so sweet. The name came out Shoe Kate when her baby brother said it. Then everybody started calling her that. She even told us kids to call her Shoe Kate instead of Miss Fisher. After she sat down, Shoe Kate reached over and poked Mr. Fisher. "What you be telling these folks, Fisher, to make everybody so quiet?" "I ain't be telling them nothing you don't already know, darling." Mr. Fisher and Shoe Kate smiled at each other. They always seemed to be smiling and laughing together. "Did any famous people stay in your house, Shoe Kate?" T-Bone asked. "Now I know what he's been talking over here," Shoe Kate said. "Fisher, you've been telling about the time Duke Ellington came and stayed at the place in West Virginia when you were living." "I sure was," said Mr. Fisher. "No reason to keep that fine bit of history a secret." "Oh, so it's history now, is it, Poisson?" said Miss Ida. I think she was teasing. All the grown-ups laughed. "Well, T," said Shoe Kate, "I never made history like Mr. Fisher here. But I was somewhere one time when history was being made." "Shoe Kate, I bet I know what you're talking about. Go on, tell the children." Miss Ida sounded excited. The sky was really getting dark. I like the best time most of all, when the sky is dark. You can imagine that almost anything is out there. You can imagine almost anything. Shoe Kate began her story. "Around the time that Fisher was living in West Virginia, I was living with my family in Washington, D.C. My papa worked for the railroad. He was a train car porter, so he had to travel most of the time. All of us looked forward to Papa's days off, the days he was going to be home. Oh, those days were the best days, the days when Papa was home. He made sure we all did something special on those days. All of us together, Papa, Mama, and each one of us kids. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. And as shut out as we were in Washington, we could still find lots of things to do." "What you mean shut out, Shoe Kate?" Frida asked. "Just what the words say, sugar. Black folks were shut out. We couldn't go to the movie theaters, big restaurants, just about any place you think folks ought to be able to go if the place is open to the public and folks have the inclination to go. Well, when my papa was growing up in Washington, black folks couldn't even go to the national monuments." Punkin looked at Shoe Kate kind of funny. "But Washington is the capital city. That's where they make laws for the whole country. How could they break the law keeping folks from going places just because they're black?" Frida had been waiting all evening to get back at Punkin, and her chance had finally come. "Now look who's talking out of her head. Girl, don't you know nothing? Used to be that the law said it was okay to keep black folks out," she said. "Don't you two get started now. Frida's right about the laws, of course," Miss Ida said, pulling Punkin down to sit beside her. "But that's another story. A long story for another time. Go on, Shoe Kate, please." Shoe Kate did. "Anyhow, this one time we were all real excited because Papa was going to be home for Easter. He wasn't always able to be there for holidays, so we were all looking forward to having him home and being able to dress up in our new clothes and go to church together. But it wasn't Papa's plan for us to go to church that Easter Sunday. After we were all dressed and ready to leave the house, Papa said we were going to go catch the trolley car. Then we got real excited. Catching the trolley car? We knew the Papa must be planning something special because we didn't need to catch the trolley to go to our church. We only had to walk a couple blocks to get there." Shoe Kate sat up straighter. It was like her remembering was pushing at her back. How grand we were, riding on that trolley that Easter Sunday morning. And even grander when Papa explained that we were on our way to the Lincoln Memorial. That was exciting enough. Then he went on to tell us that we were going to hear one of the greatest voices in America. "Who are you going to hear, Shoe Kate?" Frida asked the question this time. "We were going to hear Marian Anderson, a grand, grand singer, a voice more magnificent than you could ever imagine. But there was more to it than just going to hear Marian Anderson sing, much more." Shoe Kate wiggled down to the edge of her chair and moved her face closer to us. It was like this. Several months before that Easter Sunday, a concert had been arranged. It was arranged for Marian Anderson to sing at Constitution Hall. Constitution Hall was the big concert stage in Washington where all the famous musicians appeared, people from all over the world. Well, Marian Anderson certainly was famous, and she had sung all over the world. Didn't matter though. Marian Anderson's concert was not going to take place at Constitution Hall. See, Marian Anderson was black. People who owned the hall said no black musician was going to perform on their stage. Shoe Kate sat back in her chair. Her eyes got narrow. While we rode on the trolley, Papa told us what happened. A lot of people in Washington were furious about Miss Anderson not being able to sing at Constitution Hall. The wife of the President of the United States was one of those furious people. So she and some others got together to arrange for Miss Anderson to sing somewhere else. Shoe Kate started moving her hands as she talked. Her smile was come back. Constitution Hall, with its white columns and high-up ceiling, wouldn't welcome Miss Marian Anderson. But the Lincoln Memorial would. There would be no walls to keep people out, and the sky would be the ceiling. On Easter Sunday morning, just about anybody who wanted to would be able to hear and see Marian Anderson sing, including my entire family. Shoe Kate's smile was all over her face. First, we thought it might rain. We got in there early, very early, hoping to get close enough to see. And while we waited, we kept looking up at the sky, wishing for the sun to come out. The crowd grew and grew. So many people, all kinds of people. Black folks, white folks, standing there together in front of the Lincoln Memorial, waiting to hear Marian Anderson sing. Mr. Fisher started grinning himself. What Shoe Kate was about to say must have been his favorite part of the story. It was about the time for the concert to start. Just as Marian Anderson was getting ready to walk out onto the place she was going to sing from, the sun came out. Yes, it did. Shoe Kate's voice grew softer. So we moved closer to hear her. When the concert started, our papa took turns holding the little ones up so they could get a better look. When he reached down to get my baby brother Jimmy, I saw tears rolling down his cheeks. I asked my mama if Papa was crying because he was happy. This is what Mama said to us sometimes when we caught her crying. Mama said that some of Papa's tears were happy tears, but some were not. Some were tears of sadness, maybe even anger. Mama said to me, "Listen to the words she sings, Kate." Miss Anderson was singing a song I knew, "My Country 'Tis of Thee." I recognized the words. From every mountainside let freedom ring. Your papa's thinking about those words and what they should mean, Mama said. Thoughts like that might be making him feel good and bad at the same time. That's probably why there are tears on your papa's face. Shoe Kate sat back in her chair. Her voice got almost regular. So you see, on that Easter Sunday, I saw history being made there at the Lincoln Memorial. I also saw my papa cry with pride and sadness at the same time. It was a day that will live in my memory forever. Shoe Kate's remembering had kind of put a spell on us, on everybody listening. Even Pumpkin was real still, and she was usually moving around like a doll on strings. When my father and my sister Sylvia walked up on the porch, we all jumped. Nobody heard them coming. Goodness, you all gave me a fright. Miss Ida got up. Hi, Sylvia. Here, take my seat, J.S., she said to Daddy. I'll get more chairs from the house. No need, Ida, Daddy said. If you folks are going to be leaving very soon, and there'll be plenty of room. Daddy looked over at me and Frida. I knew that the very best time was about to be over for us. Hey, J.S., what you been up to? Daddy and Mr. Fisher were shaking hands. I just been walking down the corner to make sure Sylvia and her friends know it's time to come home. Sylvia don't know nothing when Pee-wee's around. I just had to say that. My sister thinks she's something special just because Boney old Pee-wee said she was cute. Shut up! Sylvia wanted to hit me. I just knew it. Don't speak that way to your sister, Daddy said to Sylvia. And you, Missy, he said, pointing to me. If you want to get your extra few minutes here, I think you better have kind of thoughts for Sylvia. There's been some wonderful thoughts on this porch tonight, folks. Let's keep the good words going. Miss Ida always makes things okay. J.S., she said, you missed a wonderful story. Shoe Kate was telling us about the time she saw Marian Anderson. Oh, yeah, Daddy said, like he was remembering something. You told me a little bit about that, Shoe Kate. I wish I'd been here to hear the whole story. Tell him the story, Shoe Kate. We'd love to hear it again, right, Frida? I wanted so much to make the best time last. Good try, baby, but it won't work tonight. Daddy hardly ever let my tricks work on him. I have another chapter for that story, however. Want to hear it? While he was talking, Daddy winked at Shoe Kate. I thought he was fooling. Miss Ida sat up in her seat, like she felt the same as me, wanting the evening to go on. Come on, J.S. Sit down and take your turn this evening, Miss Ida motioned for us to make room for Daddy. Then my daddy started his remembering. I had an uncle, Uncle Henry, who lived in Washington, Daddy began. He taught at Howard University there for many years. Uncle Henry was a big man, well over 6 feet tall. He had full, wide eyebrows that came together like a hairy V whenever he frowned. And Uncle Henry frowned easily, especially when one of us was messing up. His voice was like a drum, booming, deep. His voice, his frown, and his attitude would put the fear of God in you. Uncle Henry didn't play. Daddy chuckled. I dearly loved Uncle Henry, though. We all did. In fact, he was probably the favorite of everybody in the family. Whenever there was going to be a family gathering, we all wanted it to be at Uncle Henry's. At Uncle Henry's, you knew there'd be lots to do, lots to eat, and best of all, lots and lots of Uncle Henry. Daddy had a deep voice, too. A good telling voice. Uncle Henry had worked hard to get where he wanted to be in life, and he was one of the lucky ones. He got there. Yep, Uncle Henry was a grand old guy. One of those people you hope will go on forever. Daddy looked out in the darkness. I think he was seeing Uncle Henry in his mind. I think I was too. Whenever us nephews and nieces would gather around the breakfast or dinner table, Uncle Henry would claim the floor. But we didn't mind at all. Uncle Henry was a magnificent storyteller. And though we didn't know it then, his stories were like fuel for our young minds. Uncle Henry firmly believed that the knowledge of our history, the history of Black folks, was the most important story that we could ever be told. I can just hear him now. You can know where you're going in this world only if you know where you've been. Mr. Fisher slapped his hand on his leg. Now that's a man after my own heart, he said. Shh, Fisher, let J.S. go on, Shoe Kate said. Daddy did. Uncle Henry held us spellbound with his stories. He told us about the great civilizations of Africa that existed thousands of years ago, and tell us about that. T-Bone moved real close to Daddy. That's a story for another time, T, Daddy said. I'll be sure to tell you, but I better get on with this one right now. One of Uncle Henry's stories described how he had been there that Easter Sunday at the Lincoln Memorial. But that same story had another part, a part that told something that happened before that famous Sunday. You see, another important event had taken place in that same spot 17 years earlier. The dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. Uncle Henry had been there too. Wow, said T-Bone and Pumpkin. I know how they felt. It wasn't much of a wow as you might think, kids. At the dedication of this monument to the man known as the Great Emancipator, Black folks who had come to stand in a special section, a section off to the left of the monument, away from the white folks, who could stand in dead center, right in front. Daddy had started breathing hard. It sounded loud. Everything else was quiet except Daddy's breathing. Anyhow, during one of our visits to Uncle Henry, Marian Anderson was going to be given another concert. It was very important to Uncle Henry that all the nieces and nephews have a chance to go. So you heard the concert at the Lincoln Memorial too, right? T-Bone was making it hard for Daddy to get on with his story. I wanted to put some tape over his mouth. Daddy smiled. No. As a matter of fact, I didn't. The concert I went to was held at Constitution Hall. What? All of us were surprised at this twist. That's right, Daddy said. His breathing wasn't so loud now. It was 1965, over 25 years since that concert at the Lincoln Memorial. Marian Anderson was now at the end of her career as a singer. The concert was taking place so she could say farewell to Washington audiences. Constitution Hall was still one of the finest concert stages in Washington, a stage now open to all performers, no matter what their color. It had been that way for years, but that concert and that magnificent singer were special, very special. Everybody was looking at Daddy as he went on. Many of the people in that hall that night were African Americans. Some of these Black people had also been standing on the grass under the sky that Easter Sunday morning, and some, like Uncle Henry, had been out there on the grass for the dedication in 1922. Now, these same people were sitting in the Forbidden Hall, some of them in the best seats of the house. When Marian Anderson came onto the stage, the applause of the crowd was like the roar of 1,000 pounding seas. It went on and on and on. But above the noise, there was one thing I heard very clearly. "You heard your Uncle Henry, right?" Miss Ida was smiling at Dad, and her eyes were sparkly, like raindrops are sparkly when you can look through them on the window and see the sun. My dad's voice was real soft. "I did, Ida. I could hear Uncle Henry. But I think I would have known what he was saying, even if I hadn't heard him, just like I can hear him now. You can know where you're going in this world, only if you know where you've been." In the quiet after Daddy stopped talking, I looked out into the velvet black sky. I tried to imagine the sound of 1,000 pounding seas. I tried to imagine some other things too, like how it might have been to ride on a trolley, or to spend the night in the same house with a famous person, or to go to a famous monument and not be able to stand where I wanted to. My dad's story brought the end to the very best time that evening. Like we always did, Frida, T, Pumpkin, and I said goodnight to all the grown-ups, and we walked each other home. I walked Frida home, then she walked me home, then I walked her home again, and Sylvia told on us like she usually does, so I finally went home for good to go to bed. Just before I go to sleep is the very, very last part of the very best time. After I'm in bed and my light is turned off, I can look out my bedroom window and see Miss Ida's porch. Most of the time, the grown-ups are still there. I can hear them talking and laughing, but it's soft and far away. These sounds feel good. They keep the very best times close. So close that they're with me when my eyelids stop cooperating and I just drop. I think the very best times go with me into my dreams. The end.